A Christmas story. A long, long time ago, way back, there was a forest. And this forest stretched from the north to the south and from the east all the way to the west. And this forest was the same as the forest today, but it was different. There was the fact that it was always summer in the forest. Just at that point after spring, at the beginning of the summer, when the trees are most magnificent. And the other thing that was different is that if you went into this forest, you'd hear the trees speaking. They spoke all the time about the things that were important to them. They spoke about the badgers in the roots. They spoke about the squirrels in the branches, and they spoke about the birds in the treetops. They spoke about the weather, mainly. They loved to tell poetry, and these poems could last for years, tens of years in some cases, and everything was well and happy. But then one day, a great old gnarled oak tree spoke up, and he said, "I am the oldest tree in this forest, and I have decided that I'm more important than every other tree, and therefore I should be king." Well, no tree had ever suggested that they were more important than any other tree in the forest before, and this started a murmur. It started a rumble and a creak, and all of the trees started to argue at once, and Ash, standing next to the oak, suddenly spoke up, and he said, "What do you mean, you are king? I am bigger, taller and stronger than you, Oak. I should be Rex, I should be king." And then a voice from lower down, the blackthorn, "I have got needles and daggers on the ends of my fingers. If there's going to be any king, it should be me, because I would always win a battle. And is that not what it means to be king?" And then the birch tree next said, "I have the most beautiful bark of any tree in this forest. I should be queen." Well, that set off the rowan. "Look at my leaves. My leaves are beautiful. They're like birds' feathers, and my berries are the most beautiful red that anybody's ever seen. It's like jewels. It's like a crown. I should be queen." And this went all the way around the forest until every tree, well, most trees, were arguing. And the noise was horrendous. It was deafeningly loud, and it woke up Mother Nature herself. And she came to the forest and she walked around, and she came up to the oak and she said, "Oak, why do you presume that you are more important than any other tree and that you should be king, tree?" And the oak said, "Look at me. Look how strong I am. Look how old I am. Of course I should be king." And she moved on, and she went to the ash. "Why, Ash, should you be king? I'm tall and strong and bigger. I stretch my arms to the sky. Of course I should be king." "Blackthorn, why should you be king?" "I'm strong. I have daggers. Of course I should be king." And on and on and on she went, asking each tree in turn, and they all said that they should be king. And towards the edge of the forest she came to a clearing, and in the middle of the clearing there stood a fir tree. Different to most of the trees, because the fir tree had needles rather than leaves. And she wandered to the fir tree and she said, "Fir tree, do you think you should be king?" And the fir tree said, no, 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 no. Of course not. Of course I shouldn't be king. We all play a role in the forest. We all have jobs to do. The birch looks after the baby trees until they grow tall enough to be strong enough to live. The oak tree grows tall and strong and supports all of the creatures and the plants that grow on their leaves, and on and on and on. None of us should be king or queen. We should all live together. And Mother Nature breathed a sigh of relief. At least one of my trees knows the real answer about this question. And so Mother Nature came up with a plan, and she went from the forest and all the way to the north. And when she got there, she spoke to the frost giants. And for the first time ever in the forest, she invited them in. Now, some people call the frost giants Jack Frost. You may have heard of him. And so he came. And as he came and crept around the forest, the summer turned to autumn. And the temperature dropped, and all the trees started to shiver and to shake, and slowly, because they shook so much, their leaves started to turn colours and fall onto the ground. And all the trees were absolutely terrified. They didn't know what was going on. They stopped the argument about who was the best and who was the tallest and who was the sharpest and who was the prettiest. And they just stood and shook. And slowly they looked around. And there was one tree in the forest that wasn't affected, that wasn't shivering. And that was the fir tree, because the fir tree's branches were down, and inside the fir tree was warm, protected by its heavy needles. And so the other trees crept out, and they wandered over to the fir tree, and they said, "Fir tree, please can we hide under your branches? Please can we stay warm close to you?" And of course the fir tree said, "Yes, of course you can. Of course you can come and shelter under me." And so all of those tree spirits left the trees that they inhabit in the summer and hid underneath the fir tree's boughs. And they stayed there right the way until Mother Nature had thought they had learnt their lesson. And in the spring she sent the frost giants home, and the temperature warmed and the summer came, and slowly the tree spirits came out from underneath the fir tree's boughs and entered the trees again, where they could tell stories and poems, and everything was well. And never again did any of those trees presume to be better than any others. But that's not the end of the story, because a few years after that, the first humans came to the forest. And when they came, they noticed the fir tree in the winter didn't lose its leaves. And they themselves sheltered underneath that tree in the storms. And they celebrated the tree. And each autumn they came to the fir tree and they decorated it with beautiful coloured bits of cloth and gorgeous bits of glass. And that tradition lasted from then until now. And if on Christmas morning when you wake up, rather than running to your presents, you looked underneath your tree, you may just be lucky enough to see a tree spirit sheltering under there. Happy Christmas, everybody!